Good evening. It's an honor for me to be here. I love speaking on behalf of Destiny Rescue, but there's a passion that burns in my heart for something I want to share with you tonight. It radically changed my Christian experience, even though I was a PK, preacher's kid, grew up in church all my life. It wasn't until I was in my late 30s, after having been in ministry for a while, that the Holy Spirit really opened something up to me that I want to share with you tonight. But real quickly, before I do that, I have a new book that's just been released. Pastor Scott has already read it, and he encouraged me to just make mention of it. It's called What's God Really Like? Now, that's a loaded question, but it's all about the subtitle, Unique Insights into His Fascinating Personality. You know, I had someone who read the book who wrote on Facebook, and I just absolutely loved it. He said, you know, so often when we think of God, we think of His character. But how many times do we even think about the fact that God has a personality? And so my whole point of writing this book was to put a different face on God from what man-made religion has introduced to us. So I've got chapters in here like The One Who Laughed First, The Joyful Jesus, The Dancing Deity, Breathtaking Beauty, which talks about the beauty of God. It's hard to find anything about the beauty of God in theological books, and it's sad. I have a chapter on God's humility entitled Wonderfully Weak, and then I even tackle some of the tough issues of the Old Testament that seem to be in contradiction to what Jesus taught. It's called Affectionate, Not Angry. So again, somebody will be out there in the back to help you, and I'll eventually get back there. I'm not plugging this to sell books, but if you are touched by what you hear tonight, I think you'll love What's God Really Like. I want to be very transparent with you tonight. A number of years ago, as I said, having been in ministry for some time, I came across a statement written by 17th century theologians that absolutely messed with my head. That's no exaggeration. These theologians were contemplating the reason why man was created, and they came to this conclusion. They said the chief end of man is to glorify God and to enjoy Him forever. What a novel idea. I want to repeat that. The chief end of man, the reason why we exist, is to glorify God and to enjoy Him forever. When my eyes fell on that little phrase, and to enjoy Him forever, my mind said to me, that's too good to be true. Don't even go there. But my heart longed to embrace that reality. Was it even possible for a man or woman to enjoy God? I had never heard that concept before, even though I grew up in church. Enjoying God? And then if you lived under as much shame and condemnation as I did, never feeling I could measure up, I could never jump high enough, fast enough, jump through the hoops enough, how in the world can I believe that I can enjoy God? Especially then I really don't believe that God enjoys me. He's tolerating me until I check out and get glorified, whatever that means. And hopefully one day He'll enjoy me. But can God actually enjoy us, even in our weakness, even in our immaturity? That was the struggle that I had. I remember for days on end waking up, and that was one of the first thoughts that crossed my mind. The chief end of man is to glorify God and to enjoy Him forever. And my heart ached to want to believe that I could enjoy Him. I wanted to believe that God not only loved me, and I had heard that ad infinitum, but that God actually liked me. And I was his one-of-a-kind boy, that there was no other man that had ever lived or will ever live that's quite like me. And that I could have a unique relationship with him. And that I could touch his heart in a way no other human being ever could or will ever be able to. And here I am in the ministry, trying to do all the right things, trying to be faithful, trying to be an encouragement to people. And yet this thing is messing with me. And this phrase actually began changing my way of thinking. It's what we call repentance, metanoia in the Greek, a change of thinking, which turns our heart in the right direction. And over time, I began to put a challenge out before Holy Spirit, and I said, listen, I want to buy into this. I really want to get this, but you're going to have to help me. And he began unpacking the scriptures for me, and I began seeing things I'd never seen in this light. And I know it's going to sound like an exaggeration, but to me, this is the heartbeat of Christianity. It's not about praying a sinner's prayer and checking out. In fact, John 17:3 says this. And Jesus, by the way, was defining eternal life for us in this one verse. He did not say, and this is eternal life, pray the sinner's prayer, and you'll eventually go to heaven. He said, and this is eternal life, that they may know you and Jesus Christ, whom you have sent. And the word know there in the Greek is speaking of an intimate relationship. It's not talking about something that touches our brains. It's talking about something that warms our hearts, that makes our hearts come alive, where we see God in his beauty and we feel him and experience him, and we come to realize that the Christian life is walking with a Father who can't get enough of us, who loves being with us. In fact, as Christians, and I'm not talking about sin issues, but we've so often separated the secular from the spiritual. But there's no such distinction when you're living life with God. Fathers love to be on the golf course with me. He loves to be with you ladies when you're shopping. I don't get that, but I'm into grace, so I'll embrace it. I have a dear friend who lives on the island of Kauai in the Hawaiian chain. And he's a real word guy, okay? You'd have to know him. But we were hanging out a couple of years ago, and he said, he calls me SJ, because that's my pen name. He said, SJ, I wouldn't tell this to a lot of people, but he said, I feel the pleasure of God more on my surfboard, waiting for a wave, than at any other time. Now this guy prays. He's a student of the scriptures. But I heard his heart. I understood what he was saying. That it's not about just coming to a service on Sunday or once a month on a Wednesday, but it's living life with God. In fact, the phrase eternal life in the Greek really means life of the ages. You say, Steve, do you believe in a life to come? Absolutely. But what I want you to get tonight is that God has chosen you and embraced you and brought you home and restored you to live life with you. It's not about attaining to some perfect moral behavior. It's about loving you in the here and now and growing in him. I'm going to pray that you'll never forget this phrase. The chief end of man is to glorify God and to enjoy him forever. In fact, after I read that statement in the Westminster Catechism, it was sometime later I was reading an author, and he actually referred to that statement by these 17th century theologians. And he said he felt that the best way to really pick up the heartbeat of what these theologians were talking about is to replace the little word "and" with another little word. So it should read like this: the chief end of man is to glorify God by enjoying him forever. Because what greater way can you glorify God than by enjoying him out of an understanding of his enjoyment of you? This is what makes our lives contagious. It'll ooze out of us when we go from religious duty to delight. When we go from routine to relationship. I put it this way. When God began opening my heart to this stuff, I went from got to get to. In other words, I went from, okay, I'm a Christian, a follower of Jesus. I've got to pray. I've got to read my Bible. I've got to witness to everything that breathes. I've got to do this. I've got to do that. No exaggeration. I've gone from got to get to. I get to meditate on the beauty of Christ through the scriptures. I get to understand what God's really like through the face of Jesus. Because Jesus said, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. I get to have conversation with a God who loves being with me throughout the day. It isn't just about I've got to fold my hands and get on my knees and pray for an hour. It's about our lives becoming one of prayer, where we converse with our Father throughout the day. You know, when I get in a card that Destiny Rescue has given me to travel throughout northern Indiana to raise awareness of what this organization does, so often I say, Father, here we go again. We get to ride together. And I don't do it all the time, but as I get older, I find myself more and more thinking about God a lot. Not because I have nothing else to think about, but he's awakened my heart to something. You know, I was raised in a very conservative holiness denomination. I'm thankful for my Christian heritage. But I tell people, I went to the altar so many times, I couldn't tell you when I first met the Lord. And during Spiritual Emphasis Week or a series of special meetings in our church or other churches, I would find myself at the altar again and again and again. Why? Because I felt I could never measure up. And then being a preacher's kid, people put expectations on you that make it even worse. You ever felt like you could never pray enough? Read the scriptures enough? I remember when I was young in ministry, in the early 70s, there was a book released based on Jesus' experience in the Garden of Gethsemane with his disciples. And the author was really trying to encourage people to pray an hour a day. And I have no problem with that. But I remember getting stirred up. You have to understand my personality. When I latch onto something, I go whole hog. So we're going to pray at least an hour a day, even if it kills me. You know what I'm saying? It's kind of that kind of deal. So I'm praying for every missionary I can think about. I'm praying for this, that. I even pray for my golf swing. I know you're more spiritual than that, but that's just the way it was. And I looked down at my watch, no exaggeration, and I had 45 minutes to go. And I'm going, you've got to be kidding me. Now, again, that can sound like an extreme example, but that's just where I found myself. And I also had to admit that I had been caught up in a performance trap where I was doing the right things, but not for the right motivation. And again, Father meets us where we are. It was just immaturity on my part. But you know, one day I'm sitting in my study. This wasn't planned, but I found myself in Mark chapter 1 reading about the baptism of Jesus. I want you to go back and reread that sometime. I'm not going to take the time today. But it says that when Jesus, as a man, came out of the waters of baptism, the Father, in a booming voice, affirmed him. And as a man, Jesus needed that. And the Father said this is my beloved, unique Son, in whom I'm well pleased. And I really felt the Holy Spirit open something up to me. And I focused in on that one phrase, in whom I'm well pleased. And I thought to myself, well, up to this point, as far as we know, Jesus had not done one miracle. He hadn't healed one sick person. He hadn't raised one person from the dead. He hadn't multiplied food like popcorn. What had he done? He had worked with his hands. You know, what we call mundane, secular work. And yet the Father said, this is my unique Son in whom I'm well pleased. Pleased why? Because they were in relationship. I want to tell you something tonight. What Jesus has accomplished for us through the cross, it's not about your stuff. How good it is, it's not about your stuff. He's pleased with you because you're his daughter, you're his son. And I'm going to say it again. There's something about your personality, your makeup, that can touch him in ways no other human being will ever be able to touch him. You're special to your Father. You know, when my wife and I had our first son, I thought, how in the world can I ever love another child like I love John? And then 18 months later, Lance popped out into the world. And it was just like, whoa. And my love for both of them was just as intense, but it was unique. It was different. And that's the way it is with us. See, when you go from got to get to, when you really understand Father's affections for you, then the other stuff will take care of itself. But I think there's so much performance-oriented teaching in the church today. And that's not criticism, it's just a fact that people get on these treadmills and they end up burned out many times or bored to death because, again, they're trying to do the Christian disciplines without understanding God's passionate affection for them. I'm telling you, it makes all the difference in the world. You know, we hear a lot about holiness and purity, and that's all well and good. And so often we've tried to use shame or fear to keep people in line. But if I've learned anything growing up in an ultra-conservative holiness denomination, it's this. You can easily get people to an altar, but where are they going to be 5 to 10 years from now? Are they going to be more in love with God? Are they going to be more fascinated by him? Or are they still going to be eking out an existence? We've told people just say no to sin. But over the years, I've come to the conclusion it isn't just about saying no to temptation or sin. That's a part of it. But you've got to be able to say yes to something better, namely someone better. And you've got to believe that his beauty, his affections for you are what your hearts were made for. There's a real battle for beauty going on right now. And with the whole issue of pornography, a lot of men are caught up in this stuff, and it's a counterfeit intimacy. The beauty of the female body or the male body. And yet my contention is there's a beauty. He's God, the beautiful one, who has made us for himself. And it isn't just about saying no, it's about being able to say yes. One of the things I struggle with when I really started to surrender to this whole idea of enjoying God was the subject of the fear of the Lord. Because I had heard theologians tell me that the fear of the Lord's a literal fear. And I bought into that. But in my heart, I wasn't sure about that. And so the more I started to study, even Jewish writers, looking at things from the Hebraic perspective, it suddenly dawned on me. As Abraham Heschel said, the true fear of the Lord doesn't make us shrink back. The true fear of the Lord invites us to draw near to God. It's not a cringing, tormenting fear. The Hebrew word can mean fear, but Heschel says in the context of the fear of God, the relationship we are to have with God, it's all about awe. Yes, reverence, but awe. I call it holy fascination. When you really get grace and what we sang about tonight and what Jesus accomplished for us, it's like, whoa, you've got to be kidding me. You can't make grace good enough. It's amazing grace. It's more than amazing. People would say, well, the fear of the Lord is to hate evil. You bet. The more I'm fascinated by God, the less sin will fascinate me. The more I'm fascinated by God, I'm going to hate anything that would potentially blind me from the beauty and the affections of the God who's my Father. Does that make sense? I'm scared to death of boredom. I really am. Because I think boredom can really be a setup. Our hearts weren't made to be bored. And I get it. You know, I've traveled all over the world, taught this message any number of different ways. But I know I'm really going against the stream in one sense because I'm not sure a lot of people are convinced that God's fascinating or he has an appealing personality. In fact, the way the gospel is presented in some circles, the only reason why God the Father doesn't take us out is because Jesus is kind of doing this. Remember the cross. It's like Jesus came to save us from the Father. It's kind of the way it's preached. Even though 2 Corinthians 5 tells us that the Father was in Christ on the cross, reconciling the world to himself, not counting their sins against them. That's the Father I've come to love and enjoy. You know, we've only got like 35 minutes with you tonight. But let's talk about prayer as it relates to enjoying God. How many of you struggle with prayer? I'm going to put up both hands. We know we're supposed to pray. Jesus prayed. He modeled prayer for us. But again, what is prayer? Is prayer telling God what we think he wants to hear? Or is prayer supposed to be gut level, intimate communion with the one who chose us and made us for himself? You know, I could use theological terms that would go over the heads of a lot of people, but what's the point? So that's why I try to be honest, transparent, and as practical as I can be. Let me share a story with you, and I think it will help you as it relates to prayer. This is an actually true story. I heard this a few years ago. But there was a man who, several years prior to the story being told, really experienced the love of God. He had an encounter with Jesus. And he started going to a congregation where the preacher taught a lot about prayer. And yet this guy was frustrated. He had a hard time praying. He was bored. He didn't know what to say. And so over time, he got frustrated even more by his pastor's preaching. And so he waited till everybody was gone after the service one Sunday. And he went into the pastor's office and he said, "Can I talk to you for a minute?" And he just poured out his heart. You know what the pastor did? Went to his library, pulled out a book written by a Swiss theologian that was at least 300 pages long, handed the guy the book and said, "Go home and read it." He didn't get past the third page. He had to look up at least 13 words in the English dictionary just to try and follow this guy. And he quit reading the book. And one day he was talking to a friend of his that he didn't think was all that spiritual. And you know what the friend said? "Why don't you go home, take out an empty chair, sit across from the empty chair, and have a conversation with your Heavenly Father?" Okay, so hold that thought. A couple of years later, this man is stricken with cancer, and the man's daughter called their pastor to come and pray for him, but for whatever reason, he was too busy and never made it to the house to pray for the sick man. And over time, the man's daughter heard that there was a traveling minister who lived in the area. And somehow she got a hold of his phone number and called him, and he was willing to come and pray. So picture this. She's leading him down a corridor in the house, goes into a back bedroom where her father is lying in bed, and the traveling minister looks to his left when he walks through the door, and there's an empty chair. So he just assumes the chair's for him. Well, when the sick man saw the minister looking at the empty chair, he said, "Would you please close the door? What I'm about to share with you, I haven't even shared with my daughter." And then he proceeded to tell the traveling minister what his friend had said 2 years prior. And then he said this. He said, "These last 2 years have been some of the most precious years of my life, as I've just had a conversation with my Heavenly Father 2 hours a day." The traveling minister was taken back somewhat. They talked a little more. He ended up praying for the sick man and went home. I think a couple of weeks later, the sick man's daughter went to do some grocery shopping, and when she came back after she put her groceries away, she went down to see how her dad was doing. And when she walked into the bedroom, she discovered that he was on his knees. He had passed, but he passed with his arms around an empty chair. I'll never forget that story as long as I live. The daughter was taken back by what she saw, what she had witnessed. And so she called this traveling minister's phone number, and she told him that her dad had passed. But she said, "There's one thing I don't understand. I don't understand why I found my dad on his knees with his arms around an empty chair." You know, I shared that story when I was speaking in Hawaii a couple of years ago. And I didn't know this, but there was a couple there who had been living together for a number of years. They loved each other. They had children. But for whatever reason, he didn't want to make a lasting commitment to her in marriage. But after hearing that story, he went home, took out an empty chair, and had a conversation with his Heavenly Father. And to make a long story short, he felt that Father had spoken to him that day, and it encouraged him to commit to this woman for life. And so while I was on the island of Kauai that very week, Jason, they got married. Now, you say, is it about an empty chair? No, it's not about the chair at all. That would bore me to death. But it's about understanding that prayer, first and foremost, is a conversation with a Father who simply loves being with you. You know what I like to do? I like to be outside. I don't like to be cooped up. I live near a park on Lake Wawasee, and I love going down to that park. And most of the time, I'll sit in my pickup truck with the windows down. And I just love praying and reading and talking to Father, reflecting on His beauty, His creation. You know, I think we've complicated this thing way too much. You say, what about intercession? As I converse with Father, then He starts dropping people into my mind, things that He wants me to pray about. But again, it's all about relationship. So I just want to leave you with this tonight. The chief end of your life is to glorify God by enjoying Him forever. And when you don't know what God looks like, look into the face of Jesus. I appreciate Moses, David, the prophets, but a Jew in John chapter 1, verse 18 said this, no man has seen God at any time. Moses had encounters, David had encounters, but they never really saw Him for who He really is. That's why Jesus came, yes, to bring redemption, but as the perfect reflection of the Godhead. He said, to see me is to see the Father. I'm so thankful that Jesus came and revealed a Father I always wanted, a Father that I always needed, a Father that you always wanted and needed. I want you to stand up and I want you to close your eyes. I'm going to read a poem from my book. It's one of my favorite poems. It's not that I've always been big into poetry, but when I read this, man, it so impacted me. I got in touch with the writer, and she gave me permission to put this in my book. I want you to close your eyes, and I want you to listen very carefully to the words of this poem. It's entitled, The Way You Love Me, and it's based on Psalm 139. Sometimes I think of you forming me from nothing, shaping tendon and muscle and bone to cover the vulnerable places in me. I think of you absorbed in the details, using your fingers to tenderly draw the contours of my body. I think of you bending over me to breathe life into my lungs, the intimacy of your breath in my mouth. This is how you have loved me from the moment you dreamed a dream of me. This is how you love me even now, as you swim in my veins and whisper in my ear. You are the secret I carry in my body.